What kind of husband freezes his wife's credit cards without even warning her? I thought I was just being witty when I joked that he was so boring I needed toys to keep me satisfied. Now he's packing his bag, and everyone is acting like I deserve it. My name is Vesper Aldane. I'm 31, and I work as a receptionist at a dental office. People say it's a simple job, but I like being the first face everyone sees. At home, though, I never feel noticed. My husband Rowan is steady, polite, and dependable, but he is also dull to the core. We've been married 8 years, and I feel like I've aged 20. Sometimes I joke to keep things lively. I make comments, tease him, try to shake him awake, but everyone around us acts like I'm the villain for having a sense of humor. Rowan just sits there, silent, staring like I've committed a crime. I tell myself it's not wrong to want more. I'm still young. I deserve to laugh, to feel wanted, to have attention. That's why I never minded when Elias, the bartender I used to see, started showing up again. He notices my hair, my clothes, the effort I put in. Rowan never says a word, and if I joke that I might need toys to keep me entertained, well, it's better than actually doing something worse. At least that's what I told myself before Rowan started plotting his revenge. We were all gathered at the dining table that Saturday night, the kind of family dinner Rowan always insisted on when his parents were in town. His father Jude sat at the head, stiff as ever, while his mother spoke quietly with my mother Fiona about recipes. Our kids, Noah and Clara, were restless, shifting in their chairs. And me? I was bored out of my mind. The food was fine, the wine was decent, but the conversation was dragging. Rowan was giving one of his long explanations about a project at work, something about servers and networks that no one cared about. I glanced at my sister Lila, who rolled her eyes as if to say, "Here we go again." That was all the encouragement I needed. I cut into his monologue with a laugh and said Rowan was so dull sometimes that I might as well buy myself toys just to feel something. I thought it was funny. The table went silent. I laughed again, trying to push them to join me. Fiona chuckled nervously, covering her mouth like it was harmless banter. But Jude's face tightened, his fork frozen halfway to his lips. Lila stared at me like I had just slapped someone. Rowan didn't say a word. He kept his eyes on his plate, cutting into his chicken like I hadn't spoken at all. That silence made me push harder. I added that maybe some men just weren't built to keep up with lively wives, and it wasn't my fault if I needed to find ways to cope. Fiona tried to laugh along, telling me I always had a sharp tongue, but Lila snapped that I was humiliating him in front of everyone. I rolled my eyes and said Rowan needed to lighten up. If he couldn't handle a joke, maybe he wasn't as strong as everyone thought. That got a few awkward chuckles, but mostly silence. Noah looked up from his plate and asked in his small voice why Mommy needed toys if Daddy was already there. Clara frowned and leaned against Rowan's arm, confused. Rowan finally put his fork down and dabbed his mouth with his napkin. He excused himself from the table in a calm, measured tone, like he was stepping away from a meeting instead of his own family dinner. He walked out of the dining room without raising his voice or showing a hint of anger. That calmness unsettled me more than if he had shouted. Jude slammed his hand on the table and muttered that enough was enough. Fiona rushed to say I was just joking, that Rowan shouldn't take everything so seriously. Lila glared at me, asking if I even heard myself, if I understood what I had just done to my own husband. I brushed her off, saying she wouldn't understand because she didn't have anyone of her own to tease. But the truth is, even as I smirked and sipped my wine, a knot was forming in my stomach. The look on Noah's face, the way Clara clung to Rowan as he left the room, and the icy silence from Jude all told me I had crossed a line. Still, I told myself it was fine. Rowan would calm down, Fiona would smooth it over, and life would go on. After dinner, when the kids were tucked into bed, I tried to act normal. I joked with Fiona in the kitchen while washing dishes, saying Rowan would get over it like always. She smiled at me and said men needed to be tested sometimes. Lila muttered under her breath that I was going to regret pushing him so far. I pretended not to hear her. Later, I went upstairs and found Rowan already in the guest room with the door closed. I knocked, but he didn't answer. I told myself he was sulking, that he'd come around. But deep down, something in me knew this wasn't like the other times. He hadn't argued. He hadn't defended himself. He had simply walked away. That night, lying in bed alone, I scrolled through my phone. Elias had sent me a late message with a joke about the bar crowd. I smiled and typed back, enjoying the attention. If Rowan wanted to act like a ghost in his own house, that was his problem. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for him to snap out of it. Still, even as I pressed send, I couldn't shake the image of Rowan's face at the table, calm, silent, and calculating. It wasn't the face of a man defeated. It was the face of a man taking notes. And in that silence, something had shifted. At work the following week, I tried to act like nothing had happened. The clinic was busy, phones ringing non-stop, patients filing in and out. I liked being the gatekeeper at the front desk, the one people had to go through. It gave me a sense of control, but beneath that, I was unsettled. Rowan had barely spoken to me since the dinner. He got up early, left without a word, and came home late, disappearing into his study or the guest room. The silence was louder than any fight we'd ever had. That's when Elias walked in. He strolled through the glass doors like he owned the place, bringing me coffee with that crooked smile of his. He leaned on my desk, asking if I had time for lunch. My co-workers exchanged glances. I knew what they were thinking. I told myself I didn't care. Why shouldn't I have lunch with a friend who actually noticed me? We sat in the break room, eating sandwiches and laughing about nothing. I could feel the eyes of two hygienists watching us, whispering, "Let them whisper." Elias asked if Rowan minded, and I laughed, saying Rowan barely noticed what I did these days. It wasn't a lie. That night, Rowan came home earlier than usual. He asked flatly if Elias had been around again. I raised my eyebrows and asked why it mattered. He said people were talking. I shot back that if he was secure, he wouldn't let gossip bother him. He stared at me for a long time, then turned and walked away without another word. I hated that. His refusal to argue, his refusal to give me something to push against. Later in the week, I went out with a few co-workers to the lounge where Elias bartended. The lights were dim, music low, and he was in his element. He poured me a drink on the house and leaned across the bar to whisper something funny. I laughed louder than I needed to, enjoying the way heads turned. One of my co-workers muttered that I was playing with fire. I told her she was too uptight. When Rowan walked in an hour later, I nearly dropped my glass. He didn't make a scene. He just stood at the back of the lounge, his eyes on me, his phone in his hand. I kept laughing with Elias, pretending I didn't care, but my skin burned under his stare. At one point, I raised my voice so he'd hear, joking that Elias was better company than my husband. Some people at the bar chuckled, and Elias grinned, but Rowan didn't flinch. He simply lifted his phone slightly, thumb moving, as if he was recording every word. The next morning, I tried to brush it off. I told Rowan he was paranoid, that he should stop spying on me. He said nothing, only grabbed his keys and left. I told Fiona later that he was sulking again, and she said men like Rowan needed to be put in their place. She laughed and said I had my father's wit, and that Rowan would eventually thank me for keeping him sharp. But not everyone agreed. My sister Lila came by after hearing whispers from mutual friends. She confronted me in the kitchen, asking why I was humiliating my husband in public. I told her she was jealous of the attention I got, jealous that no one ever looked at her. She snapped that I was tearing my marriage apart and walked out. I rolled my eyes, but her words clung to me. That weekend, Rowan was quiet again, spending long hours in his study. I knocked once, trying to ask if he wanted dinner, but he didn't answer. When I opened the door, he closed his laptop quickly. Papers were spread across the desk, but I couldn't see what they were. He smiled politely, too politely, and locked the screen. I asked what he was hiding. He said he was just busy with work. His calm tone made my stomach twist. I went to bed restless, scrolling through messages from Elias. He asked if I was okay, saying I seemed distracted at the lounge. I told him everything was fine, just marital boredom. He sent back a winking emoji, and I smiled. But lying there in the dark, I couldn't ignore the weight of Rowan's silence. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't fighting, he was preparing. And deep down, I knew it. The following Friday, Rowan suggested we take the kids out to dinner. At first, I thought maybe he was finally trying to smooth things over, but his tone was too calm, too deliberate. We ended up at a family restaurant, one of those bright places with crayons on the table and paper menus for the kids to draw on. Noah and Clara were thrilled, and for a moment, I convinced myself it would be a normal night. Rowan sat across from me, quiet as always, letting the kids chatter about their school projects. I tried to fill the silence with stories from work, exaggerated and colourful, dropping little hints about Elias just to see if Rowan would flinch. He didn't. He nodded politely, cutting Noah's chicken into small pieces, pouring Clara's juice, acting like the perfect father while ignoring me. That stung, so I turned up the volume. When the kids got busy colouring, I leaned back in my chair and announced to the table that Rowan was so boring, I sometimes felt like falling asleep when he talked. A couple of my friends had joined us that evening, and they gave nervous laughs, not sure if they were supposed to join in. I kept going, saying that maybe I should buy toys to keep myself entertained, since my husband clearly couldn't manage it. The table went silent. Even the kids looked up. Noah frowned, his crayon pausing mid-line. Clara clutched her stuffed rabbit closer and asked if Daddy was sad. Rowan didn't move. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He just dabbed his mouth with his napkin and set it neatly by his plate. Jude, who had joined us, slammed his hand against the table hard enough that the glasses rattled. He muttered that this had gone on long enough, that no man should tolerate being mocked like that by his own wife in front of children. Fiona immediately tried to smooth things over, saying I was only joking, that Rowan knew how playful I could be. I forced a laugh, insisting everyone needed to lighten up, that humour was the only thing keeping this marriage from turning into complete silence. Rowan's sister Lila shook her head, disgusted. She told me I was cruel, that I was hurting the kids as much as I was hurting him. I rolled my eyes and said she wouldn't understand because she didn't have a husband to tease. She pushed her chair back, her voice sharp, telling Rowan that he needed to stop letting me walk all over him. He said nothing, his face unreadable. The kids were watching everything. Noah whispered to Clara, asking if Mommy didn't love Daddy anymore. That question made my stomach twist, but I refused to let it show. I took a long sip of my drink and smiled at Rowan, daring him to say something. He simply met my eyes for a moment, then reached into his pocket and placed his phone on the table. The screen was lit, the little red recording light blinking. The realization hit me like a slap. He had been recording, not just that night, but probably before. Every cruel joke, every harmless comment, every moment I had twisted into humor, captured. My mouth went dry. I tried to laugh it off, telling everyone he must be making a playlist or checking emails, but no one looked convinced. Jude leaned forward, nodding slightly as if he already knew what Rowan was doing. Lila gave me a sharp look, like she had finally figured out the game. Even Fiona fell quiet, her defense of me fading under the weight of that little red light. Dinner ended quickly after that. Rowan paid the bill without a word and stood up, telling the kids to get their coats. Noah held his hand tightly, while Clara clung to his arm. I followed behind, furious but unsettled, my heels clicking loudly against the tile floor. In the car, the kids were unusually quiet. I tried to lighten the mood, saying Daddy was just being dramatic. Rowan said nothing, eyes fixed on the road. When we got home, he took the kids upstairs, read them their bedtime story, and came back down only to disappear into his study again. I paced the kitchen, angry at his silence, angry at his calmness, angry at the blinking red light still burned into my memory. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't begging, he wasn't even arguing. He was building something I couldn't yet see. I poured myself a glass of wine and called Fiona, telling her Rowan was overreacting, that he was trying to make me look bad. She said he'd calmed down, that men always did. But when I called Lila afterward, hoping for support, she told me flat out that Rowan was preparing to leave me, and I'd brought it on myself. I hung up on her. That night, when I went to bed, Rowan was still in the study. I thought about barging in, but something stopped me. The image of him placing that phone on the table, calm and steady, replayed in my head. He wasn't playing defense anymore. He was on offense, and I had no idea what his next move would be. The house felt different after that dinner. It wasn't loud or dramatic, not the way I half expected. Instead, everything grew quieter, sharper, like the air was thinner. Rowan moved through the rooms with a steady pace, polite to the children, calm with his father, but distant with me. It was as if he had built an invisible wall, and no matter how hard I poked, I couldn't get through. I thought if I pushed him, he would finally snap, give me something to work with. One evening, as he came in from work, I asked if he was proud of himself for making me look bad in front of the whole family. He said nothing, just hung up his coat. I followed him down the hallway, demanding to know if he was going to sulk forever. He looked at me once, expression unreadable, then closed the study door behind him. That infuriated me more than yelling ever could. Later, I went through the mail and saw another envelope from the law office. My heart skipped when I noticed the word custody in bold print through the window. I laughed to myself, tossing it back on the counter. It was a bluff, I told myself. Rowan was trying to scare me into apologizing. He wouldn't actually go that far. I tried to spin the story with Fiona, telling her Rowan was punishing me for having a personality, for refusing to sit quiet like some dull housewife. She clucked her tongue and said he was overreacting, that men always sulk when women outsmart them. Her reassurance gave me a momentary rush of confidence, but when I mentioned it to Lila later, she didn't sugarcoat anything. She told me I was selfish, cruel, and blind if I thought Rowan was bluffing. I snapped back that she was bitter, single, and jealous of me. She hung up. The kids were noticing too. Noah asked why Daddy slept in the guest room now, why his toothbrush wasn't beside mine anymore. I told him Daddy just needed space, that sometimes grown-ups had little arguments, but the look in his eyes, worried, too old for his age, stung more than I wanted to admit. Clara clung to Rowan constantly, following him like a shadow. It made me furious. She should have been clinging to me. One night, I barged into the study without knocking. Rowan was at his desk, papers spread around him, laptop open. He quickly closed the screen when I entered, smiling politely, too politely. I asked what he was hiding. He said it was just work. His tone was so even it unsettled me. I demanded to know if he thought freezing me out would fix anything. He didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he asked if the kids had finished their homework. That was it. Then he looked back down, dismissing me without a fight. The next day, I went to use my card at the grocery store and it was declined. Embarrassed, I tried another. Declined again. I had to leave everything at the register and drive home empty-handed. When I stormed into the house, Rowan was calmly pouring the kids' milk at the table. I threw my purse down and demanded to know what he had done. He said quietly that finances were being reorganized. No anger, no raised voice, just a cold statement of fact. I told him he was cruel, that he was ruining our marriage out of pride. He didn't even look at me. He told the kids to finish their dinner and went back into the study. I shouted after him, asking if this was really the kind of man he wanted to be. He didn't answer. That night, I called Fiona again, furious. She said Rowan was playing a dangerous game, but she still believed he would give in once he realized how much trouble he was causing. She said men like to act powerful, but they always caved when family stability was at stake. I wanted to believe her, but when I saw Jude drop by the next evening, stepping into the study with Rowan, my stomach twisted. They spoke quietly for nearly an hour. When Jude left, he gave me a look I couldn't read. It wasn't pity. It was something colder, almost satisfied. I poured myself a glass of wine, trying to calm down, telling myself Rowan was bluffing, that he wouldn't really risk his own life just to spite me. But as I sat alone in the living room, I realized something chilling. He hadn't threatened, he hadn't argued, he hadn't begged, he had acted. The frozen cards, the guest room, the legal envelopes. They weren't warnings, they were steps, And for the first time, I wondered if I had already lost more than I realized. The shift came quietly, but it was undeniable. One morning, Rowan came down to the kitchen dressed in his usual work clothes, tie neat, hair combed. He poured coffee, set a mug in front of Noah, kissed Clara's head, and looked at me with that same calm expression that had begun to terrify me. He said he had meetings. I asked what kind. He didn't answer, only said they were important. Later that day, I found another envelope from the law office on the counter. This one was thicker, with my name typed neatly on the front. I didn't open it right away. I was too scared, though I told myself I was just too busy. I shoved it into my purse and ignored it. That evening, Rowan sat across from me at the dining table after the kids went to bed. He placed a folder between us. Inside were bank statements, credit freezes, and notices of accounts shifted out of my access. My jaw dropped. I demanded to know what he thought he was doing. He said calmly that he was protecting himself and the children. I laughed bitterly, telling him he was destroying his own family because his pride was hurt. He didn't argue. He just said everything was already in motion. I called Fiona in tears. She said Rowan was being cruel, punishing me unnecessarily, but she also admitted she didn't like the sound of documents and freezing cards. She told me to hold my ground, that men always came crawling back eventually. But when I tried Lila, she said Rowan was finally standing up for himself and that I should face reality. I hung up on her, furious. The next day, Miles stopped by. He cornered me in the kitchen, saying Rowan wasn't bluffing, that the paperwork was real, and that I had pushed him too far. I snapped that Rowan was being weak, hiding behind lawyers instead of talking to me like a man. Miles shook his head, telling me it wasn't weakness, it was resolve. I tried to confront Rowan that night, demanding to know if Elias had anything to do with this, if he thought I was really cheating. He said it wasn't about Elias. It was about years of humiliation, years of me twisting words and laughing at his expense. He said he had nothing left to say. His voice was steady, his eyes clear. The following morning, I went to run errands and found a realtor's sign planted firmly in our yard. The sight stopped me cold. I rushed inside, shouting that he couldn't sell the house without me. He simply looked up from his papers and said everything was already in process. My hands shook with rage. I accused him of trying to ruin my life. He replied softly that I had ruined my own life long before the sign went up. That night, when the kids were asleep, Rowan carried a small bag to the car. I stood in the doorway, demanding to know if he was leaving me. He said he was preparing. That was all. Then he drove off into the night, calm as ever. When I went back inside, another envelope was waiting on the kitchen table. This one was thicker than the rest. My name again, bold letters across the front. Inside were the papers, divorce filings, custody petitions, financial freezes, and a clear outline of what was to come. My hands shook as I read through the pages. Custody split, assets divided, property sale in progress. His signature was already there, steady and firm. Mine was the only one missing. I called Fiona, sobbing. She tried to reassure me, saying Rowan wouldn't follow through, that no man would actually leave his wife over a few jokes. But even as she spoke, I realized the truth. Rowan wasn't joking. He never was. The house felt colder that night, emptier. The silence pressed in, broken only by the sound of my own breathing. For years, I had been the loud one, the one making the jokes, the one controlling the room. Now, Rowan had taken control. Not with shouting, not with threats, but with documents, signatures, and steps I couldn't undo. And for the first time, I was afraid of what came next. The mediation room smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. I sat at the long table, my hands clenched together, nails biting into my skin. Across from me sat Rowan, calm as always, with a lawyer at his side. The mediator began with a practiced tone, explaining the process, but I barely heard her. My eyes were fixed on Rowan. He didn't look at me with anger or even sadness, just focus, steady. She slid a stack of papers toward me. Divorce filings, financial division, custody arrangements. My name in print at the top of every page. My throat tightened. I asked Rowan if this was really what he wanted, if he was just going to let some stranger decide the fate of our family. He said it wasn't about letting anyone decide. It was about protecting the children and making things clear. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but there was no hesitation in it. I tried to twist the story. I told the mediator Rowan was overreacting, that I'd only been joking, that every marriage needed humor. Rowan didn't even flinch. He said calmly that repeated humiliation wasn't humor, it was cruelty. He had recordings, evidence, and witnesses if needed. My stomach turned cold. The mediator went through the custody plan. Shared custody, alternating weeks, financial responsibilities, split. Noah would stay with him for the first week, Clara the next, then rotate. I shook my head, insisting the children needed stability with me, their mother. Rowan's lawyer simply noted that stability came from respect, and that the court had already reviewed his documentation. When the session ended, the mediator summarized the terms. The house would be sold, accounts divided, custody finalized. Rowan signed the documents with a steady hand, page after page. I sat frozen, pen in my hand, my mind screaming to stall, to protest, to demand a second chance. But the words wouldn't come. My chest felt hollow. Outside the room, Noah and Clara were waiting with Jude and Fiona. Clara ran straight into Rowan's arms, clinging to him. Noah stood beside his grandfather, avoiding my eyes. I called his name, but he pretended not to hear. That silence cut deeper than anything Rowan had done. Fiona rushed to me, whispering that everything could still be fixed, that Rowan was just being dramatic. But even she didn't sound convinced anymore. Jude, meanwhile, put a hand on Rowan's shoulder, pride clear in his eyes. Lila didn't say anything to me at all. She just looked at me once, then followed Rowan out with the children. I stood in the hallway, papers clutched against my chest, my heart pounding. I told myself I still had power, that I could talk him around, that this wasn't final. But I knew. The steady lines of his signature, the calm way he held our daughter, the quiet respect in his father's nod. All of it told me the same thing. Rowan wasn't bluffing. He never had been. And now, the life I thought I controlled was already gone. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.